Good morning, everyone. Wonderful to have so many people in the room, and for those of us joining us online, good morning or good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are or when you are watching this. I'm Ivo Daalder, the CEO of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Great to see all of you for this really important discussion about what's happening in the Middle East. Somebody told me that something is happening over the past year. We just marked, I think is the right word, the October 7th anniversary in which Hamas launched a major terrorist attack against Israel, and we've been in a conflict-ridden region ever since. I can't think of three people more better placed to talk about these than our three guests here, all of whom are associated in one form or another with the Crown Center for Middle East Studies at Brandeis University. But let me just quickly introduce him. On my far left is Abdel Monem Said Aly, an Egyptian senator and a founding senior fellow at the Crown Center. Shai Feldman is the Raymond Frankel Professor of Israeli Politics and Society, also at the Crown Center. And last but not least, Khalil Shikaki is the director of the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, and also a senior fellow at the Crown Center. The three of them are the author of a unique book, and I urge you all, for those interested in knowing what is happening in the Middle East and what's happened, to get that book. It's called Arabs and Israelis: Conflict and Peacemaking in the Middle East. It is the first university textbook on the Arab-Israeli conflict that has been co-written by an Israeli, a Palestinian, and an Egyptian. We'll start off together with a little discussion, and then we'll open up for Q&A. You can join us online by, or even in the room if you're shy, to type in ccga.live and ask your question there. Today's program is on the record, and of course, any views expressed are those of the people who express them and not of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. With that, welcome. Wonderful to see all three of you here. For some of you, back for a return visit, not just for the first time. Shai, let's start with you. If you had to summarize sort of what you see has happened over the past year and where we are today, how would you do that?
So I would try to make 5 or 6 points in the few minutes. One is this has turned out to be already the longest war in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict. The only one that came even close to it is the War of Independence, or Israel's War of Independence, in 1948-49. But if you actually count the fighting days, because the War of Independence had like 3 ceasefires in the middle of the war, if you actually count the fighting days, this war is already 3 times as long as that longest war, the 1948-1949 war. That's number one. Number two, the 2 objectives that the Israeli government defined immediately after the October 7 disaster, which is essentially destroy Hamas as a fighting force and destroy Hamas as a governing entity that governs the Gaza Strip. Essentially, Israel has failed to achieve these objectives. Hamas is still there, it's still fighting, or its armed members are still fighting. And on top of that, it's still also the most effective, put it this way, until now, governing body on the streets of Gaza. The second objective that Israel defined, which is to release the hostages, that clearly is so far has failed. However, and that's the third point, Hamas is a military organization. And October 7 was an attack by a military organization. It was after quite a few years, in which Hamas organized itself as a military organization. It fought as platoons and as battalions and brigades. It's no longer a military organization. That Hamas that attacked Israel on October 7 doesn't exist and cannot launch a second October 7. And I don't think that it would ever be able to to do this. So that's point number 3. Point number 4 is that the idea of Qasem Soleimani, the commander, the former commander of the Quds Force, is to create essentially a ring of fire around Israel, succeeded. We see this in the fact that that all these proxies have joined the war. The most important of them is Hezbollah, but now you see also the involvement of the Houthis of Yemen and the pro-Iranian militias in Iraq and so on. And so Israel finds itself actually, for the first time since it feared it's surrounded on the eve of the 1967 war, surrounded by this ring of fire. And Sinwar, with all the disaster that he brought upon Hamas, has succeeded in activating this ring of fire that Iran inspired and the Qasem Soleimani helped build. So that's the 4th point. The 5th point is that Israel is now engaged in this kind of a war of attrition between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, and it's both sides are in a way exercising a principle of Israeli strategy as early as the 1950s, which I will call escalation dominance. Each side is trying to bring this confrontation to an end to meet its objectives by escalating. But the result, of course, has been that we are now in a kind of a spiral since this competition began. The 6th point that I would make is that the U.S. facilitated, and I think the Biden administration really succeeded, in my own personal view, beyond what one could expect, to build a counter to this axis of or the ring of fire or the axis of resistance that Iran built. And that was already tested twice in a situation where Iran actually engaged Israel directly, which was the first time ever that Iran actually launched a military operation against Israel. But that Iranian operation was confronted by a coalition that the United States facilitated in building. That included, of course, Israel, included the U.S., but also included Arab countries. And again, if you would have asked me 3 or 4 years ago, would I see a situation in which there would be this kind of a military confrontation in which most of the intercepts were above Jordanian air territory, I would have said, what, Jordan is involved essentially in an effort to defend the state of Israel? That's not likely to happen. Well, it happened, and it's happening now, and in fact, this kind of a counter coalition takes a lot of time, and because you have to reach a very high degree of coordination between the members. And the remarkable thing is that it was kept completely quiet. All this operation, all this preparation that the U.S. facilitated did not reach the media. We didn't have an inkling of how effective this could be until actually this happened. And in a situation in which Washington, D.C. and Israel are the places where secrets are not actually kept by anybody, it's even more startling that they were able to do this. My final point in this kind of a quick net assessment is that whereas Hamas is basically walked into or created a disaster for itself, the Palestinians, in contrast to Hamas, the Palestinians have gained. Because the Palestinians' main problem has been on the eve of or leading to October 7, that essentially the leading thought, either during the Trump administration and in Israel, was that that one can construct an Arab-Israeli peace which is to say between states, between Arab states and Israel, that would allow these countries to essentially bypass the Palestinian issue. And I think that what happened after October 7 is now made it absolutely clear that there is no such thing as a resolution of the Israeli-Arab conflict without addressing the Palestinian issue. You don't address the Palestinian issue, it blows up in your face. And it blew up in our face, Israel's face, on October 7. And I think this lesson is going to stay with us for I would say an indefined period of time. So that's my 7th point.
7 really brilliant points. We'll get back to some of that and the implications, including the Palestinian issue. But before that, Abdel Monem, I wanted to sort of get you on to comment on all of this from a regional perspective. How has the region evolved? Of course, I think Shai mentioned an important one in terms of the counter coalition, which is a critical and a new phase. But there is many more things that are that have happened as a result of what the events over the last year.
Thank you very much. Thank for the Council for hosting us for this important issue. The regional perspective of this, that we have very complex situation that in my study of the subject and follow up and fighting in it, about 50 years, I think we have something completely new in complexity. The complexity starts from the level 1 in the war actually is a little bit hidden. That was a nuclear one. It is related to Iranian attempt to have a nuclear weapon because there is another country in the region who already a nuclear country, that's Israel. And they want to create this situation, and there is an objection from the United States and the international community, major powers, even China and Russia, again is that the Iranians will have a nuclear weapon. So Iran devised a kind of defense that's based on what they call it advanced defense. Create country militias in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, wherever they can create and finance, train, and weaponize. And also creating something, a feeling in the region that the very rich and very much advanced in the Gulf countries are hostage. I mean, across the street, I serviced in Qatar, for instance, and in the Emirates. You feel that's the Persian weight all over the Gulf. And now with the Persian is really carrying an Islamic revolutionary trend, they are much heavier, the feeling in terms of the geopolitics of it. So we have that level, in which also Israel is involved because it doesn't want anyone to be nuclear. So that's the first level. The second one is the regional. The regional is really already divided, As a result of the Arab Spring, trends came out. There was the trend of the youth, people in Tahrir Square and the different squares in the region for about 3 years demonstrating. But they actually, despite they succeeded to overthrow regimes, they failed completely to offer an alternative to the regime that they overthrew. A second trend came out, appeared, and it was there, but it became much more powerful, much more motivated, much more carrying the momentum, which is Islamists of all kinds in the region. I will title them here as an umbrella, the kind of a Muslim Brothers dominance in the region, creating a kind of a bridge with Iran. Iran is a Shia country, but it has fundamentalist Shia Islam. And the Sunni countries started to carry also Sunni fundamentalist Islam, trying to take, the states, if in their logic, if Israel is a Jewish state, they have the right to have Islamic states. So that's this current. They reached power like in Egypt, in Tunisia, in a number of countries, in Sudan. So that's a situation in which a kind of a trend trying to have the politics of the region in its hand. A third trend, we started almost in 2014 and 15. It happened in Egypt, it happened in Saudi Arabia, it was already there in the UAE, in a number of the countries of the region that's, a kind of revisionist kind of view, reformist one. The guys, we have been there in these kinds of religious and national kind of conflicts for a long period of time, and we are not going anywhere. So we have reform. reform became necessary, reform socially, economically, politically, in such a way to start taking the model, more or less, that prevailed in Southeast Asia. The models of South Korea, of Singapore, of the countries of ASEAN, that they try to start by building, working on trade, exports, all kinds of things. So this trend started to fight. You know, we have here polarization in the region between the Islamists and the reformists. And in some places, like, which was very reactionary, very traditional, very conservative, Saudi Arabia, completely it changed. That's the most revolutionary kind of change that's taken place. So that is on the region's level. Then the war. The war came in October 7th, started with very barbaric, terrorist, criminal aggression against civilians. And it made a blow-up of the case. This blow-up of the case tells us about two things. One, a failure in one hand of the Palestinian National Liberation Movement to create a serious state in the region. And also, I will say, an Israeli failure to be accepted and deal with the Palestinian issue. That's until today, there is a kind of deniability of the existence of a Palestinian state or a Palestinian nationalism of a sort. So we have, in essence, failure of convincing in politics or even in non-politics politics. So here, that the war started with this and ended. It's not ended yet, but so far it created a situation about creating the case, another case of never again. I mean, creating a generations that really have seen a lot of, here I'm not talking about tit for tat, but I'm talking about the situation in Gaza Strip, in Lebanon, in the region, of the ability to destroy towns, destroy schools, destroy infrastructure. And we have, on the other hand, the ability of others to make their victory is to continue. So we have something here will remind us with what happened before in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in which, despite of the time, despite of the superiority of power, despite of the winning, it seems to be winning, you know, that the existence, the continuation of the resistance, it means victory. So the continuation of Hamas is like Taliban. Exactly. The resistance of Hezbollah, it's like Taliban, will continue. So we have here a situation about a war that's unwinnable by any side. Hamas did not win the war by October 7th, did not really change the Israeli politics, or even convince, of course, the Israeli society to accept the reality of a Palestinian state. On the other hand, I will say Israel, despite there is no one I know of Israelis when in October 7th will think that will be a full year after that, and still the issue and the war is going. So even the United States, despite of its investment of aircraft carriers and a lot of kind of weaponry, a lot of billions of dollars, still couldn't make a ceasefire for 3 weeks prevail. And Egypt was involved in that, Egypt and Qatar and the United States in these negotiations, which is my fourth point here, is diplomacy. What to do about that? We have 75 years now of this kind of a saga of violence and counter-violence, and talk about nationalism, talking about all kinds of adversity you can find in the book. Everybody is Hitler in this conflict. Everybody is a victim in this conflict as well. So between victimhood and between violence, then that's how the region is feeling, with uneasiness. That for a country like Egypt, the reform countries are really wanted stability. You can't create an export country as it can make a place that tourists will come to it, with it is ports and cities are on fire. So here is the stability for purely material benefit Besides, of course, the affinity, the religion factor, the historical factors, created a lot of contradictory kind of, of, uh, of tendencies in the game. Do we have a solution for that in the region? I think we have. I mean, now and that's sorry, my really last point. Last point here that immediately after the war started, Egypt called for a peace conference in Cairo. And that peace conference resulted actually not of a statement by the people who attended the peace conference, but by 9 Arab states, which I consider the kind of a charter that came for 9 states. 6 of them got a peace treaty with Israel already. Second, there are the other 3 who wanted to have a peace treaty with Israel and create normalization, among them Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Oman. These are the 3 countries that's really still left out, but they are really on the road. What they said, we said they are denouncing, rejecting all touching of civilian people in this war. They said we have to start immediately providing aid to Gaza. Third, that we have a ceasefire and then start negotiating something about making something serious for this generation and for his generation to come. That's a situation which we are in now, in which these countries are trying, and people like me are hoping that taking the lesson of Sadat and King Hussein and the others, I know a lot of people put burden on the United States. The United States did that, it didn't do that, it paid that. I think if we are going to have peace, it got to start from the region. President Sadat didn't take a permission for anybody to do what he did, and ended was the largest country in the region, that's Egypt, to make peace with Israel, and it continued for the past 45 years. So we have now peace, and peace also between Jordan. It would have been possible if the Oslo Agreement succeeded. But at least we have now part of what was said by the 9 states, that the need for reinvigorating Oslo, in a sense, to create a Palestinian state on the basis of the 2-state solution. That's what is in the table. But it is disrupted. Now the game is Iran will hit and Israel will hit. So the size of the hit, I mean, that's something I don't know. From reading history, I found that kind of, when wars really get into being a theater, not theaters of operation, theater of who will start first, who will tit for tat kind of behavior, not really to cut off, make serious negotiations and start to move on, or somebody will win. But after a year, nobody is winning really. There are a lot of losses. Israelis, for the first time in the history of the conflict, are displaced. I mean, that's also something only belongs to Palestinians or to Lebanese in Lebanon or for Syrians in Syria, but not in Israel. In Israel, for the first time, they faced the idea of displaced. Higher rate of casualties in the same time. Israel, which is the startup nation, is really, I doubt a lot of people are thinking about how Israel will be like, say, Singapore or countries that's really working on advancement of technology, advancement of things that benefit the citizens and the rest of the world. So nobody is winning. Thank you very much.
No, Abdel Monem, I think that's a very... Everybody's losing in some ways is the other part of it. Although by losing, some are trying to win. A very apt observation. Both Shai and Abdel Monem mentioned the Palestinians. Shai said they were winners in the sense that the issue is now back on the front stage, which is clearly true for the United States, maybe less so in Israel, but and the Arab countries. You know the Palestinians better than anyone else. You've poll them regularly. Where are they? You've also done some polling on in Israel, including on Arab Israelis, and both inside Hamas and inside Gaza and inside the West Bank. How do you see the evolution of Palestinian and opinion in the region over this year?
Well, Shai and Abdel Monem actually made 3 points that I want to begin with. Shai said this is a wake-up call, a reminder that peace and stability in the region cannot come unless the Israeli-Palestinian issue is resolved. Abdel Monem said the change can come only from the region. We can't wait for the U.S. leadership. Abdel Monem also said it has to be based on a two-state solution. I don't know if Shai said that. I imagine Shai would say that as well. So the question, do Palestinians and Israelis still support a two-state solution? Do they still want a two-state solution? Or did the war eliminate that option completely? The answer is based on the most recent surveys that have been conducted among Palestinians and Israelis. The answer is yes, they still want a two-state solution. If you ask them directly, do you want a two-state solution, they will say no. But my conclusion from looking at the data that we've collected in this most recent survey, joint Israeli-Palestinian survey, in which Israelis and Palestinians were asked identical questions, is that they do want a two-state solution. What about the war? Hasn't the war done a great deal of damage to that? The answer is yes, it has. It has done tremendous damage. We find Israelis justifying what is going on now in Gaza, all the killing that is taking place because of October the 7th. And if you ask Palestinians, did what Hamas do on October the 7th justifiable by what was happening before in Gaza, the siege and blockade and all of that, they will say yes, by 80 to 90%. Israelis and Palestinians justify all kinds of atrocities, all kinds of massacres that are happening right in front of their own eyes by what the other side is doing and has done. They think, so why? Why do they think it justifies it? Well, because they think the other side came in to commit genocide. Israeli Jews believe when Hamas came in, the goal was genocide. And Palestinians think what Israel is currently doing is genocide. This is not completely new, by the way. Surveys before the war did show that perception of the long-term goal of the other side is exactly that: extermination, expulsion, or at least denial of political rights. Both sides believe if the other side wins, that's what the other side will do. It will exterminate us, expel us, or deny us political rights. So this is, but what is now new is that short-term goal is genocide. That is new. We've not seen this before. The dehumanization that is currently documented in the surveys is also unprecedented. If you ask Palestinians and Israeli Jews, you talked about Israeli Arabs as well. Israeli Arabs are the only exception to everything that I just said and I'm about to say about the impact of the war. Israeli Arabs are the only actors who have not been so negatively damaged, their psychosocial attitudes damaged by the war. The dehumanization is overwhelming. That essentially means 85 to 90% of Palestinians and Israeli Jews do not believe that the other side are human beings. To a large extent, it is not about who you are, but what you do. Israelis say those who committed the massacres on October the 7th cannot be human beings, and Palestinians say those who are doing what they're doing right now cannot be human beings. This is what we are seeing today. The distrust We've been conducting joint Israeli-Palestinian surveys since 2000. So 25 years of surveys, we have never seen the level of distrust as low as it is today. How low is it? Less than 10%, both sides. Less than 10% express the belief that the other side is trustworthy. The conflict is zero-sum. Anything good for one side must be, by definition, bad for the other side. There's almost everybody. Again, 85 to 90% believe in that. And the perception that the land of ours, it has always been very high. That is, Israeli Jews and Palestinians believe that this is our land, not theirs. The intensity of this belief is also unprecedented. Everything that I've just said, we find almost exactly the same in terms of its level on both societies, Israeli Jews and Palestinians, with the exception of Israeli Arabs. But from here on, things will begin to differ. When we look at, okay, so what is the way out? Where do we go from here? And is the two-state solution still applicable? Is it doable? Palestinians say more yes than they have done in the past 5 years at least. Israeli Jews say no by more than what they have ever said during the last 30 years. Support for the two-state solution has gone down among Israeli Jews. The belief that there is a diplomatic solution to the conflict has gone down considerably. The support for all kinds of concessions required in order to make a two-state solution doable has gone down considerably among Israeli Jews. Among Palestinians, it has actually gone up. It's not a majority. Things before the war were also very, very bad. Keep that in mind. The support before the war for the two-state solution among Israeli Jews and Palestinians was just 1/3. Only 1/3 of Israeli Jews and Palestinians supported. It was 80 to 90% among Israeli Arabs. It remains that high among Israeli Arabs. Now the support for the two-state solution among Palestinians is about 40%. Among Israeli Jews, it has gone down from 1/3 to 1/5, just about 20%. However, we do find that there are two things that seem to change attitudes considerably, Israeli Jews and Palestinians. One is fear, the other is positive incentives. Fear, we gave Israelis and Palestinians a solution to the conflict essentially based on the Biden vision. Ceasefire, two-state solution, regional peace, 3 components. We said, would you buy into that? They said no. We said, the next question was, what do you think is going to happen now? Is there going to be expansion to the West Bank of the war? Is there going to be a regional war? Is Iran going to get involved in a regional war in the entire Middle East? They said yes. By a large majority on both sides said yes. Okay, so I said, wait. So if you really, really have a choice here in the matter, would you take this package we just gave you, the Biden vision, or risk going to war? By 65%. Palestinians and Israeli Jews, exactly the same percentage, said, peace. We'll take what we've just rejected, rather than go to a regional war. When we tested positive incentives like we tell the Palestinians after peace, based on a two-state solution, Palestinian laborers would continue to work in Israel. Incentive for Israeli Jews. After peace, Israeli factories that are currently operating in the West Bank can continue to operate. Or something that is less tangible. Israelis will issue an apology for the suffering of refugees. Or Palestinians will recognize the Jewish character of the State of Israel. We find that with the right combination of incentives, the support for the two-state solution and the package that contains all kinds of painful concessions. Remember what I said. 1/5 of Israeli Jews said they would support that. What happens after the incentives? It goes up to more than 60%. The support for the same exact thing that we have offered and they rejected. Similarly for the Palestinians, although we've seen a rise in support among the Palestinians for that package, very painful concessions, 40% actually said yes to that package compared to 25% among Israeli Jews. When we offer the Palestinians these incentives that I spoke about earlier, we get support for the package among Palestinians to the same level as Israeli Jews, which is more than 60%. So in conclusion, the question I started with, in answer to the questions raised, is yes, they still support a two-state solution. But given all the pain they feel, the fear that they have, they're not going to be a force for peace. They don't think there's a partner on the other side, which means leaders can make a difference, and we don't have them.
So that's the most optimistic presentation I've heard about the Middle East in a long time ago, in some ways. And it does raise the question, Shai, maybe start with you. I mean, if we just take for a moment that the people will move in the right direction if leadership can demonstrate the benefits both of the incentives that Khalil talked about and the avoiding the worst situation of a regional war. What is the political situation inside Israel to bring about that kind of leadership?
Right now, it's very bad. And I think that this is another symmetry between, you asked me about Israel, but I think that Khalil will agree with me that the same situation applies for different reasons among Palestinians. Not among Palestinians, but at least among the Palestinian Authority, which is the only address that Israel has, as of Oslo and so on and so forth. And in both cases, what we have is a monumental leadership deficit. So if you ask me right now, what are the prospects? I would say, to use Khalil's numbers, 10%. However, and this is something that I think that there are 2 points that I think needs to be remembered here. This conflict, again, described very vividly by both of my colleagues. For me, it's the equivalent of, it's a combination right now of October 7. October 7, there are certain similarities between October 7 and 9/11. But we are actually in the middle of the Vietnam War around 1971-72. We're in the middle of World War II around 1942-43. It was, if you think about the level of violence that all sides experienced during this period, to have a conversation with Vietnamese that would say, hey, with a different situation, Vietnam can be a tourist attraction, or which has become, which Israelis, when they have to take a week or 10 days off the miseries, where do they travel? Among other places, they travel to Vietnam. Okay, and if you told Europeans in 1943 that this war would end with a concert, because Abdel Monem didn't use this time the word concert, but this is a concert of 9 Arab countries. There was a concert that created the United Nations in San Francisco, and Europe, having experienced the worst calamity in European history, right, produced the European Union, it produced NATO, it produced 76 years of peace until Putin invaded Ukraine. So to think about that this is a possibility at this time of greatest misery, which was existential for both sides, where at least one of the sides really created degrees of horror that nobody even conceived are possible. I mentioned the Holocaust as part of World War II. So to try to be optimistic about the prospects, you needed some French and other, I'd say, visionaries to envision that there is an alternative to the world that led us to World War II. Now, so that's my point. I would just stress one more point, which unfortunately it adds a complication. but it's very important to stress here. Because, because Abdel Monem mentioned, and rightly so, the analogies of, the years of the U.S. in Iraq and the U.S. in Afghanistan and so on and so forth. And I could say the years of the U.S. in Vietnam. The big difference between all these cases and the conflict that we are in is that the Vietnamese had no claims on the United States of America. Okay, they had a big issue about the U.S. presence in Southeast Asia. Even Al Qaeda that went all the way to New York, but it wasn't really a claim on the U.S. It had to do with the U.S. role in the Middle East. The French, the Algerian rebels wanted a different Algeria. They wanted the Algeria to be for the Algerians, but they did not have a claim on France. And the same applies to. So what's the difference here? The difference is that Israel has at least the adversaries, and Hamas is a good example. Its claim is not on Gaza. It's not even a claim for a Palestinian state. Its claim is on Israel. And when it fought, it didn't go to the other side of the world to reach New York and Pennsylvania and the Pentagon. It crossed the border, and it created this horror, just across the border. That's the difference. In that sense, this actually is consistent with what Khalil said about, attitudes in right now and as of, because it's existential. And the U.S. could go back, the French could go back to France, the U.S. could go back to the U.S. I don't think the daily lives in Chicago were affected even by the, let's say, the missteps that took place in the last evacuation of Afghanistan. It didn't change lives here. In Israel, everything is immediate and everything is existential.
Yeah, no, that's certainly. This is why this conflict is more complicated in some ways. But Abdel Monem, you ended, I think, also on a slightly optimistic note, which is that the regional leaders need to start the process. You may need the United States as part of that process. I think, again, the polling and the incentives and fear that Khalil talked about provide that package. Where is that leadership going to come from? Where is the next Sadat or even the next Hussein willing to say, actually, we're going to do something slightly different, more challenging and risky? Why doesn't MBS travel to Jerusalem and say, this is our vision for how we can end this conflict?
Of course, when we use examples of history or of geography, we understand that it is an analogy. It got to be adjusted to the current situation. And the idea of conflict by proximity, having Israel beside the Palestinians, it happened before. In India, for instance, we have Pakistan and we have India. And we have North Vietnam and South Vietnam, and we have North Korea and South Korea. So the idea of resolving what it seems unresolvable conflict by dividing the piece of land, in this case, it is there in history and other examples. And usually existence is difficult. It is not easy between the Pakistanis and the Indians or between still the Vietnamese. Only it took a whole war to really unify Vietnam. So here, dealing with that issue, I think we have to adjust to the situation that now in the 21st century and now in the third decade of the first century. And I remember, I and Shai actually, we wrote a policy brief at the Crown Center called Saving the Middle East. It was the central idea for it, what was the idea of what I took it from European history about the concert of Europe, that we need concert of Arabia, concert of the region. And the one thing that was missing at the time when we wrote the piece was, are the countries that we thought they are ready or not? We feel a need, geopolitical and geoeconomic needs to do that or not. I claim that there is now, that's happening. countries of like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates, and the rest of the Gulf states, and Morocco, and Jordan, these countries are really now inward looking, basically. They want to solve historical processes, tradition that was too much, I will say, undesirable, and really as stands against any kind of reform and progress, the idea of progress as a whole. And I will say, the treatment of women, the treatment of the Shia and Sunni countries, the treatment of Christians in dominant Islam. These ideas now are now treatable and under treatment in such a way that goes with the currents that we all citizens of a state. The idea of renewal of religious thought, there was no one in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s of the last century could dare to say we are going to renew our thought of Islam or how we are, going to reform religious traditional institutions, big like Al-Azhar, big like the High Islamic Council in Saudi Arabia. These things are changing because also these institutions are not only for religion, it's also for politics. So I will say we have a core now states. I claim that Egypt and Saudi Arabia, that's the first circle. It is also has geopolitical relations related to the Red Sea. I mean, when we look at them, it is half an hour, the planes can cross the sea between the two countries. And they are the core. One has a lot of money and one has a lot of population. And both of them are involved into a vast kind of renovation of the infrastructure and also renewal of religious thought and something like that. The same as I said of the Nile. I think that these are the concept of Arabia that I think that can. And in the same time, they can give legitimacy and they can take it off. And I think they are taking off legitimacy from Hamas, from Hezbollah, from all these counter-revolutionaries that really want to change the region for an image that the region is now doesn't want it to have. What they got with Iran and what they got, weapons and training and money from Iran. I am not just accusing them of that. Their first step was to break down Lebanon. Lebanon is which is considered the heights of civilization, women, fashion, all the things that's related with the Western world, when they are rich. And you have what they did for Syria. Anything we look at history, we'll find a lot of Syria in it. I will claim that this kind of civilization that went under a lot of revolutionary rhetoric for a long period of time, they are now not getting conservative. I think they are getting more progressive. They are not democratic, I know. But the democratic is not the one priority at this stage. First, you got to get equality, you get a place for women and so forth. So I will say these are we have to now remember that all the wars in the Middle East are overstudied. And I will say very little done about the mechanics of peace. How these guys, Hussein and Sadat and others did it. How they can change Carter. Sadat changed that. He said he will go to... Carter couldn't fathom why Sadat wanted to go to Jerusalem. And he wanted to make an international conference. Yet he went. And that was the start of the process. I will say it's not now a single individual. It is a group of countries.
I think that's very, very interesting, and I hadn't actually focused on this Arab statement that you mentioned immediately after October 7. I remember the peace conference, but the 9 countries is an interesting concept. We need to go to questions, but I want to ask you one. There is one more important question, because which is the Palestinian leadership issue. How do Palestinians look at the leadership? So if you and I think you made a very strong argument how incentives and disincentives can lead people to change. how does the Palestinian people look at their leadership as the core of how you get from where they are today where they need to go?
Okay. I'll try to be brief so that we can hear from those sitting here. There are three basic shortcomings that people see in the current leadership. One is lack of legitimacy. This is why 90% of the Palestinians, when we ask them about their current leadership, say it must resign. This is a major difficulty. Without legitimacy, your ability, the second deficit, to lead is weakened. But this Palestinian Authority, in the eyes of the Palestinians, has not even tried to lead. So this is a year of the worst thing that had happened to the Palestinians since 1948. And the Palestinian leadership, in the eyes of the Palestinians, once again, is completely absent. It has abdicated responsibility about anything that is happening in Gaza or even in the West Bank. That's a major challenge. The third deficit is that it is incapable of reform. It talks about reform. It says it wants to reform, but people see absolutely no reform. A prime minister has been appointed for the last 5 months, and when we ask Palestinians, is he reforming? The answer is, what's reform? We don't see any reform. It's the same corrupt, authoritarian Palestinian Authority. What do people want in the leadership? They want right now a technocratic, not a politician, but a technocratic prime minister who is independent of the president, and a strong prime minister who can lead, who can have a cabinet, a government, and who can, for transitional periods, say of 2 years, begin the process of bringing about stability, reconstruction, and prepare for elections. This is what Palestinians want for now in terms of leadership. They are not going to accept any leadership that does not come out as a result of elections, but they will agree to an interim, a non-political interim government led by a strong but independent prime minister.
Here's where the 9 Arab countries, the United States and Israel, can perhaps help. With that, let me. We have a few minutes left, so let's go to questions in the room. And please, first, tell us who you are, and then secondly, importantly, ask a question as opposed to a statement. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Jason Gordon. I study international relations at the University of Chicago, and I feel like I should mention that I also graduated from Brandeis earlier this year. But I know that you guys have mentioned public opinion a little bit, and I wanted to hone in a bit more specifically on what the effect of the rise of the far right in Israel, for instance, Otam Yehudit being incorporated into the government in 2022, what effect that this change has had on the development of this situation and what possible solutions there are to it.
There are many questions online that come actually to the same issue, which is the Israeli government, Netanyahu, and the question of his dependence on a particular coalition and how that affects or not affects the situation. And I can't think of any better.
The answer is simple. The Netanyahu is essentially dependent on these, especially the extremist element in this coalition. And for now, it's difficult to see how that will change until the next elections, which are to be held in 2026. I have to confess that I predicted wrongly immediately after October 7 that there would be a major reckoning in Israel that would essentially accelerate a major political change. And here I support something that Abdel Monem said. Analogies are never perfect. The analogy that I had in mind was the 1973 war, which was the closest catastrophe in Israel's political history. That was, in fact, indeed followed by a major acknowledgement or reckoning, and it took, essentially Golda Meir some months until she resigned, and essentially a few years later, a change in government. But and there are two buts here. The war in in 73 started on October 6th and it ended on October 23. So when people went to the streets, and they went in the streets in their masses after the 73 war to demand the change, this was after the war ended. This case, because the war continued and continues and continues, it's difficult for some strata of the population, it's very difficult to tell them, go to the streets, although again, since the 1982 Lebanon war, we've never seen so many hundreds of thousands of people on the street. But still, in a situation where your boys and girls are in the battlefield fighting, it's very difficult to persuade some people that Israel needs an immediate change in government when the fighting is still going on. So the analogy that I tried to use was wrong. But what do the polls show us now? The polls shows us now that if elections, but remember this, if elections were held today, okay, the present government would lose. Okay, and a different combination, which is a little bit similar to the government before this last Netanyahu-led government, the government that Naftali Bennett held, which, by the way, included a few right-wing parties, would clearly defeat the present coalition. So what it says is that people are prepared for a change. People want to see a change. People are prepared for a reckoning, but they're not pushing right now, or they can't push beyond a certain point right now, and therefore elections are not likely to happen tomorrow morning. One last thing about if elections were held tomorrow morning, one of the two parties, one of the two extreme right parties that are in this coalition, doesn't even pass the threshold if elections were held today.
Well, that's why we have elections, but sometimes we don't get them quick enough, and sometimes they come too quickly. Sir.
My name's Kenneth Newman, and I follow a lot of geopolitical stuff in the Middle East. I've been to Israel before. I've also had many Palestinian American friends. I work in soccer. I even had a pro tryout in Israel many years ago. Three quick questions. Why is it the fact that Hamas was elected by the people of Gaza to run that organization, to run that territory, why isn't that brought up more in news reports? Could Hezbollah run and become a party in the Lebanese government? And going back many years when Jordan was in what you would call potentially dangerous situation with its Palestinian population, is there still attempts by some Palestinians to overthrow the kingdom of Jordan for a Palestinian state there?
Gee, three interesting questions. Khalil, start with Hamas and the West Bank.
Hamas
and Gaza.
Hamas won the elections in 2006 for a 4-year term that ended 14 years ago. Most Palestinians would not elect Hamas. This is true for Gazans as well as West Bankers. But if you are saying most Palestinians elected Hamas in 2006, you would be wrong. A minority of Palestinians actually voted for Hamas. The electoral system allowed Hamas to win. Hamas never had a majority support among the Palestinians. Secular nationalist parties won the popular vote in 2000. If elections are held today, even today, with the rise in support for Hamas in the West Bank, Hamas would still not win the elections. The next parliament and the next government isn't likely to be made up of Hamas, and and the government and the parliament probably would create a coalition without Hamas. If Hamas is the problem in terms of making peace, Hamas is not something that right now scares the Palestinians or should scare anyone who is searching for peace. On Jordan being a future Palestinian state, I don't know why you would say that. Jordanians are proud of their Jordanian national identity, and certainly no one in Jordan that I know among Palestinians and we do surveys with colleagues in Jordan. For the last 25 years, we've been doing that jointly, almost every two years. And so we've never seen in all of these surveys any Palestinian or Jordanian calling for what you indicated, that is a Palestinian state in Jordan. What they are likely to call for is refugees who live in Jordan should go back to their homes and property inside Israel. That a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza should be created. That is certainly a majority view among Jordanians, but not in Jordan.
Can I also add two quick points? Number one, Hezbollah is in the government in Lebanon. They have a number of cabinet ministers.
I've had Lebanese friends
that are so. The issue, of course, is the discontent, and there's a wide discontent among the Lebanese population. Is first of all, why did Hezbollah tear down Lebanon? And in the two cases where Hezbollah decided to take Lebanon to war, which was in 2006 and now, they did not ask the Lebanese government for permission. They didn't ask the Lebanese people for permission. They just did it. Secondly, regarding, just to add something to what Khalil said, regarding Hamas after 2006, because of the electoral system, the outcome was exactly what Khalil mentioned. They were also part of something called the national unity government and so on and so forth. But there were very clear issues here with respect to what Hamas's position on Israel was. At that point, the European Union articulated three conditions for engaging Hamas. And that was, first of all, Hamas's government. Number one, that it was about Hamas's government, but it also had to do with Hamas. Does Hamas recognize Israel? Does
Hamas government?
Whatever.
It's important to distinguish between the government and the political party. A political party can have whatever positions it wants, but a government is, in government-to-government relations, governments can impose such conditions.
Right. But again, the Israelis were following what the response was to the European Union conditions, including the condition that the government, in this case, would essentially announce that it will abide by the agreement that the previous governments of the PA had entered into, the previous leadership of the PLO had entered into, which includes, of course, then basically saying that Oslo is the basis, okay? And it's because Hamas refused, or the Hamas government refused, the European Union refused, and by the way, also the Bush administration refused to engage that government directly because they said, okay, if the basis is peace, then we have something to talk about. If you refuse to accept these basic preconditions, then there's nothing to talk about.
We can go on for hours, but unfortunately our three guests can't because they have to be at another place in minutes. In order to, they're here for just a very few, a short time.
When we go there, Khalil will do the net assessment and I'll do the Palestinian public opinion.
and Abdel Monem will give us hope.
Absolutely.
With that, a fascinating conversation. I think the first time in the last 300 and whatever days, 79 days, that I can come away with a little bit of hope on a very, very important discussion and a very important region, which has given so many of us a very hard time to digest. So I can't think of three people have done it better than the three of you. Abdel Monem, Shai, Khalil, thank you so much. Come back to help us understand the region soon again, and hopefully to celebrate some good, even better news, an end to war and the beginning of a diplomatic process that leads to fundamental peace. Thank you. Thank you so much.